Yeah, perfect. So a small but perfectly formed Ignition room at the moment. So thank you for joining, and welcome, Nick. Obviously, kind of first time to the Ignition room. So thank you for popping in on that one. It'd be good just kind of going around the table, going around the face. We've had a good chat, but it'd be good to more formally introduce ourselves. So I should probably say that I'm Nick Meln, and I run Go Ignite Consulting, who we set up the Ignition room. And the idea is to bring people together on a monthly basis and have really good conversations around what matters with effectiveness. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Andy Oliver, marketing effectiveness consultant and agency guy. Basically, I work with Nick, and I'm ex-WPP and before that independence.
Laura.
Hello, I'm Laura Mansell and I work for the now Virgin Media O2. I have to think about which way around it goes before I say that. And I'm marketing effectiveness lead there, sitting in data, insight and analytics, and formerly of Nick's team at O2 many years ago now. But yeah, really enjoying the Ignition room when it's running. So thanks.
Cool, thanks, Laura. Nick.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, marketing director, Campari Group UK. So, we're a relatively small spirits business in the UK, sort of give or take about 2% market share, but growing reasonably fast. And got about 35 different spirits brands in our portfolio. Some Italian ones, Aperol, Campari, a few Jamaican rums, American whiskies, etc. So yeah, nice to join you for the first time.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Chiara.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ciara Morrissey. I'm working with Nick and Andy, marketing effectiveness at Go Ignite. Historically, my background is in performance marketing, and I worked at Zenith on the O2 account for several years. And before that, I worked at Cara for a couple of years. And I'm with Nick since January.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that better? That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so the challenge of attention, the Ebiquity and Lumen research report, we'll have a conversation around how useful that is, which will feed into, well, there is lots of kind of new research coming out, whether that's share of search, whether that's attention, where are the gaps in terms of what is useful for people, and kind of identifying those if necessary. And then always a kind of personal plea at the end is that we obviously want to do less speaking as part of this, and it's great to hear from other people and their stories of effectiveness. So we'll do a quick plug for people to say, come and join a podcast with us, or come and talk around your journeys within your organisations with effectiveness. A recap on the Ignition room, we want to be the destination of choice. We normally get about kind of 8 to 10 people along every month within here. We are changing how we do this, and we are doing more kind of podcast type content coming up. So hopefully we're trying to kind of spread the conversation and the content so it's not just a monthly destination, but there's things that people can tap into. And the idea is that it's a safe, fun, trusted environment for people to have just a good discussion, a good debate. And we're kind of hosting that. It should be led by members essentially, to have brilliant conversations. So with no further kind of fluffing, the challenge of attention with Ebiquity. So just a quick, has anyone managed to have a look through the rather short kind of 30-40 slide bit of research from Ebiquity, or is this kind of first sight of it?
Yeah, I read the whole paper.
Yeah, I had a look through too.
Tough going. It wasn't an easy read.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about capturing attention. I have to say I struggled through it a bit. I mean, I think the topic is interesting, and that's why we're going to discuss it. But it's the paper itself is quite text heavy and quite long. So yeah. I'm glad you've put together sort of a summary, just a couple of slides to summarise it. Helpful.
Cool. I think it helped. There's some nice visualizations within the report. But I think, why intention is important. And I think the thing that really kind of stood out for me is helping understand how consumers see ads in the real world. I think from kind of experiences that I've had client side, that often when you're testing ads, when you're building out creative, they're seen in isolation. Therefore, it's quite hard to really capture how the consumers see this. So I think, one of the positives that comes out from this is that it starts to put ads but not all ads, not via all channels in the real world, with the idea being behind this then that attention could help marketers better buy media in the short term, so become better marketers in the long term. So the challenge of attention is Ebiquity's research in partnership with Lumen, and it's hoping to provide more meaningful measures in media effectiveness models, so building a thorough and quality data set to feed into programs like MMM, and it's designed to build out a more valuable view of the impacts from digital and TV advertising, and it creates a single attention measure which is then comparable across all of the digital and TV channels and translatable into a cost per, which I think could be quite beneficial. And our kind of summary before we go into the detail, I think that kind of thought that it's a good step in further understanding how impactful digital and TV ads are, and it looks practical and looks beneficial at first sight and correlates well with sales, but we're not actually sure how much this advances the thinking in terms of then, well, what does this mean overall from a marketing perspective and investment and knowing where to put things. And I think there's three kind of key weaknesses around this. Firstly is that the sample size and the research itself, it's based over two different markets, the UK and the US, with TV research in the US, digital in the UK. So there might be slightly different consumer behaviors that come out of that, and then combined learnings are applied at an overall level. The evidence is only at an individual media channel level, which is noted within the research, and it is limited to TV and digital, and it doesn't then account for the secondary and tertiary impacts. So when someone sees someone is highly attentive to a TV ad, what does that do on search behavior? So I think, you know, they position it well in terms of this is a first step. It's not the overall answer to better understanding what the role of attention is, but it's putting a good, strong viewpoint out there. From the conversations that we seem to be having with a lot of clients at the moment, I think there's a bigger need for understanding the impact of all marketing investments, rather than looking just at understanding more the measurement of more predominantly digital channels from a performance point of view. So that's potentially something that we could, you know, look to investigate. And with that gap in mind, for us, the understanding of the role of attention doesn't offset that need for a more strategic lens across marketing investments. That's our viewpoint. We're very happy to be battered down across all of that, but I pulled some slides together out of the research for those that haven't seen it, so that we can help try and explain what attention is and the methodology behind that. So do stop for questions and I'll do my best to answer them from the knowledge that I have. So there's two parts to it. There's head tracking for TV and there's eye tracking for digital. As we said previously, the head tracking for TV is done in the US and it's across 5,000 households. And it basically records when people enter the room. It records when their heads are looking at the TV and for how long. And if the head is in a position for too long, it assumes that people are asleep, which is, I thought was quite clever. But it basically ties that back up then to the program that people are watching, the media, the channel, and the ads are being shown. So it is actually a way to take forward a different view of viewability of ads and whether people have paid attention to that. And that's similar from a digital then perspective, using Lumen in the UK with the 1,000-strong panel. It's basically installing software on either your computer or your phone, which turns the webcam or the camera on the mobile into a eye tracking camera. And that does exactly the same thing then. It reviews what's on the screen. It looks obviously and records where your eyes are, so it can see then whether something has had the option to be viewed, whether it has been viewed and for how long you paid attention to that and what was the context within that. And what that gives you is it gives you this view of the attention KPI, which is attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions. And this is supposed to work like a funnel, so flows from top to bottom, where at the top you're seeing what people could see, whether they have then looked at that, and for how long. And I think the nice thing about this is it challenges the definition of what is technically viewable. And it's showing then across the different channels that are researched, so TV, YouTube, Facebook, and display ads, that actually the technical, and I forget the independent body which comes up with the definition for viewable, but it's showing actually the impressions of what are there to be viewed. So for TV, for example, where the kind of industry definition would say that 74% of all ads shown on TV are viewed, then actually it's slightly more than that. I'm not sure whether I've got the definition quite right there. It's basically saying 74% of ads which are seen through this methodology are classified as technically viewable by the industry body that describes what technically viewable is. So hopefully that makes sense. And then it kind of filters down to then, okay, 43% of those which are shown a TV ad actually viewed it, and their dwell time on average is 13.8 seconds, which gives an attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions of just under 6,000. And that starts to then give you this uniform measure that sits across each of the different channels. So you can start to see the impact by attention of TV, which is showing that 43% of people actually view it, which gives you that 6,000 attentive seconds, versus then say a Facebook in feed, which says 81% of people who were served an ad actually go on to view it, but they're only dwelling on that ad or viewing that ad for an average of 1.6 seconds. And when they're looking at dwell time, that is any dwell time within that ad being on air or being shown. So it could be measured from the start of the ad, you could be seeing it in the middle, you could be capturing it at the end. And there is obviously then a distribution across how often people, or for how long people view that. But the average for TV is 13.8. For YouTube, it's 4.9. For Facebook, it's 1.6. And for display advertising, it is 1 second. And what this gives you then is it gives you this viewable versus technical viewability. And it was that, so there we go, the MRC standards of technical viewability. And it shows you that difference of whether people actually did view it versus whether they were technically able to view that. And I think that shows some slightly different numbers, which paints a different picture. So for example, the 30-second TV ad, the MRC standards show that 74% are technically viewable, but only 43% from this methodology went on to view it. And the flip side to that would be somewhere like Facebook, where 39% of ads are viewable, but through this methodology, they've actually tracked that 81% of people viewed it. So it's really kind of challenging the performance of the ads in terms of whether it's capturing attention.
Nick, sorry, could I just ask a question? I totally get on sort of digital media, desktop, etc., why the viewable is well below the 100, but on broadcast TV, so why isn't it 100% in terms of what you're buying is potentially viewable?
From the MRC perspective, or from the...
Yeah, because we've got a 26% drop off from what as an advertiser you think you're buying to what's potentially viewable.
Yeah,
I totally get, if you're buying on, on mobile, desktop, whatever, might be below or whatever. So, but on broadcast TV, I thought it'd be 100%, wasn't it?
Well, I assume that's taking into account people who go and make a cup of tea or go and have a chat in between watching kind of X Factor programs.
But isn't that the dropout of the next thing? Isn't that the sort of the yellow and thing? Isn't the 43% then? The
43% is saying that it's worse than actually the standards are predicting.
Yeah. Okay.
But if there's a slide coming up that shows then it shows the drop-off rate within that. So bearing in mind that this is all averages, I think there's something that will help coming onto this later. If I'll skip that now. If it's the next slide, yes it is, and that's the attention curves by media. So for example, that TV 30-second ad, which is the kind of, I'm not sure whether that's a grey line or a light blue line or whatever, but it shows that the drop-off rate is slightly less than other media. So it may get 43% of the overall impressions that were served, but for those that their attention is captured, it's held for longer within that, which might be a helpful way of then kind of just getting around that 43%.
Yeah.
So hopefully that makes
sense.
And then, so from the attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions, the stats that are being kind of bandied around with that says that the average 30-second TV ad generates the same amount of attention as 1.5 YouTube ads, 4.5 Facebook in-feed ads, or 40 desktop display ads. So I think from my perspective and through my career, I've not been a media planner, but it seems to be some of the challenges that have always come up of having this kind of unique view of assessing the impact from a viewability perspective across all media channels that we haven't seen before. And that's one of the things that stands out as really positive coming from this. And what that starts to get to you then when you are looking at your cost per 1,000 attentive seconds, which is quite a mouthful of a KPI, is it starts to show you then the value of the different channels. So from a TV perspective, looking at the right-hand chart, a 30-second TV ad on average would be £1.05 for 1,000 attentive seconds versus all the way back up to a desktop. So, I mean, I would take this with a pinch of salt. There are known and recognised limitations within this around the attention data set, where it's split between US and UK, plus other European channels by the looks of it, and then the price data sets as well, which are going to vary massively according to media, according to clients, according to agency buying targets, which the more discrete you get with your audience and your contextual targeting, then the more pricey the media is going to become. So I think it is more illustrative to this point of view rather than anything else. And that's particularly shown when you start to look at applying this to attention strategies and what that could mean within a campaign perspective. So what the research shows is two different advertisers. The first advertiser raised a relative new brand, which is launching a complex new product. And so it's got quite a lot to communicate to the market where the brand isn't known. So it would say in this case that you would be worthwhile putting more of your attentive media selection into those bigger broadcast channels. So from a TV perspective, into YouTube, into social, and then display. Versus then advertiser B, which is a well-established brand with distinctive brand assets where people know that better. You don't need to go to the broadcast channels initially. You want to be a lot more pointed around conveying that simple message of getting people to buy and tapping into their memory structures to bring that back from a brand and a mental availability perspective. So it's quite nice that you're able to kind of play that back out across the different communication strategies to understand how this could be useful.
Nick, sorry, just question on the TV. Is there any distinction between traditional TV and BVOD? You know, we buy quite a bit of BVOD, but no, is it all put together? No,
it's all put in together from this perspective. Okay. I think we did hope to have someone from British Gas here today, who's the UK brand who did trial this with Ebiquity, but we weren't able to kind of get an opinion or get them along to this, which is a shame. But I think there is probably a lot more detail that sits beneath this, but not outside of those TV channels. But it would be worth kind of conversation with Ebiquity, I think, if you were you know, looking to understand what is available at subset channels. And then to, you know, I think things like this work best when they do link back up to sales. And what this basically shows is that when ads have higher retention, people are more likely to go on and sell. And that's the sales conversions by region underneath 0.3. So it's correlation, it is not really kind of cause and effect driven yet. From what I believe it is, if you've seen this ad and it is highly attentive, you have gone on to buy rather, that is what it's showing you. But it is saying that attentive ads do perform better than less attentive ads. And I guess there's no real surprise around that, nor is there for the fact that it's not just media selection which drives attention. It's the creative idea, it's your audience and the channels that you use within this. And I think this is one of the areas which doesn't sit so well for me within this research, is that it assumes just average creative power and average audience that sits within this. The research is just looking at the media and the influence that has within driving attention and therefore driving sales. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour around that. As I said, we think this is probably a good step, but how useful it is, I think that would probably be down to diving into a bit more detail with Ebiquity to see what they can do. I'm not here to do a sales job for them, but they do a couple of methodologies where you can either run a campaign and then look back and match it against their research and apply the average principles against it. Or if you're thinking about a campaign, then you can drop a Lumen digital ads tracker within your display activity, within your digital activity, to see how that then plays out from an attentive perspective. But as we said kind of at the beginning, it feels like this is another set of research data right down at the bottom of the funnel, to really kind of understand whether it's something that helps build out the impact of cookieless world with attribution, or how that all starts to drive sales better together. Whereas what we're seeing is that there's a lot more conversations around that more top strategic level of marketing investment around, should I be investing in customer experience? Should I be investing in above the line campaigns? Should I be putting in promotions through retail channels? And that seems to be the biggest gap for us. So although this is nice and it feels like it's more kind of efficiency driven rather than effectiveness driven. So it'd be quite interesting to see whether there's any challenge to our view on that, or whether it kind of feels like it's about right.
Isn't the newest thing within this report? I mean, I think a lot of this is telling us things we know in a different way, but isn't the new metric that they've suddenly created? I mean, that's brand new. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. I suppose the question is, does the marketing community need another metric to another measurement metric to add to all the other metrics that we look at now? I mean, it sounds all great, but I don't know. I'm not sure what Laura or Nick think of that. Because it's easy enough to put it in a white paper, in a report, but to get adoption, I mean, I'm not completely convinced myself yet. I think it's overcomplicated, but I'm just trying to look at the practical applications of that, and I'm not entirely convinced yet. And I'm not very bright, so I might be missing stuff. But is it just overcomplicating marketing measurement, which is already fairly complicated? That's sort of an open question.
Yeah. I mean, I find, that going back a few charts, when we had the cost per thousand, whatever it was, I find quite useful, when you're thinking about planning, because if, face all sorts of options, and cost per thousands, etc. When you look at the, of course, things like, YouTube and Facebook advertising always look really, really tempting. But then if you add in the metric of actually how many people are really watching it versus what you potentially see, then I think it's more useful. It's kind of the way we behave anyway. I mean, it's no perfect. The bigger, I think there are a few omissions like any of these things. The other one, would be good to see the split between TV splitting into many different forms. Just treating it as one TV is one limitation. The other one that always gets left off these things is our old friend cinema, which I'm a big fan of. And potentially I think it's kind of relevant in this context, that if you think about, how much attention people got, if you get the gold spot in a cinema, you're right before the film, you're on a 10-meter screen, the phones are off, that's going to be way high on the attention. And it's something, people at YouTube often come to us, asking us to spend more money with them. And, the way we sort of play it back from them is even with kind of limited data we've got, the cost per thousand on cinema, even the gold spot versus YouTube is, I don't know, it's only surprisingly cheap. It's only sort of 3 times as much. But you think, actually, do I want to be, in between a sort of radiator fixing little video on YouTube, or do I built Dolby surround in a cinema. Hi, that's Rose just come to say hello. And you know, we go for the cinema every time, if I'm honest. And you know, the other in my industry, the other advantage is a lot of cinema. You partner with people like Everyman, and people can have a Negroni in their hand when they're watching around, as opposed to on YouTube and they're probably on a bus and not even watching anyway. So I think, you know, it annoys me when things like cinemas get left off. But in principle, the idea of adding another metric, not just looking at cost per thousand, but actually how many people are actually viewing it. Anything to say on the matter?
Yes, all opinions are welcome.
My tenure.
I think that's, I mean, it's such a good challenge with all of this, is that it is complicated trying to get that consumer view across all of the ads that you're exposed to find which ones are the most attentive and which ones are therefore going to have the biggest impact on, you know, whatever you're trying to get the consumer to do. There's not many methodologies that can do that. And I think you kind of nail it with this, is that it needs to be inclusive of all media channels available, rather than just limited to a few. And I think that's when, you know, things like this, they will be expensive, and that's why it's probably been selected to be the ones that it has been, to the level that it has.
Yeah. Am I the only one here that still believes in cinema? Is anyone else?
Well, I completely agree with your comments on cinema. I suppose the question is, what's the confidence of audiences returning to cinema in decent numbers, you know, any time soon? I mean, I don't know what the cinema chains have told customers like you, Nick, but I mean, it's not going to happen still. We're not going to get numbers in cinema for a few months.
Assuming it will come back, and you know, the Bond film has been delayed for 18 months. So that's going to be one that will get people back in numbers. Personally, I think people are desperate to get back. You know, it's a great experience. But irrespective of the COVID thing, I just, as I say, you know, have this discussion a lot with, you know, particularly people at kind of YouTube, and I'm personally frustrated by their lack of transparency in terms of sharing case studies, information on, you know, the benefits of using the YouTube. So with the data available, it's a simple comparison in terms of, the cost per thousand may be about 3 times higher. Our strong suspicion is the value of what you're getting is way more than 3 times higher. So that's where we put a lot of our investment choices. Along with BVOD, you know, BVOD is something we studied quite a bit in the last year, and seems to work from the uplift studies we've got.
There's an interesting IPA paper this year, and I think it was Wagamama, which showed the powerful impact of cinema actually within that, because you think most of the complexes that have cinemas have then the faster food eating establishments like Wagamama, and it showed actually the power of that then, of advertising within an area, you know, a catchment where you've got availability to then, well, you know, let's go to Wagamama's after James Bond or whatever. We should take a moment just to say hello to Ian, who's joined us, who's managed to escape his kids and come and join for the second bit.
That's a cracking intro.
Hi, Ian.
Hello. Apologies for the delay in joining, and I probably didn't mean to kind of cause a fissure or kind of a slowdown in what was being discussed, and I've clearly missed most of it, if not all of it, because I think it's 16 slides. So I'll try and chip in or do what I can, but apologies.
Nick, I think we may have cut Laura off. I think Laura was going to. I may not be right.
You're fine. Don't worry. I was only going to agree that, you know, with all the different channels covered, that's the way to make this useful and to be able to plan as a result. So yeah, no, it's just agreement.
Does it come up in conversation at all, though, Laura, from what you see within Virgin Media O2? Is attention something that people talk about?
Not that I've seen. I think there's been some interest in using sort of eye tracking technology and that sort of thing in some of the research methodology that we put out there at the moment. And I guess it gets used from that perspective. But in terms of general conversations, I've not heard it come up much, I have to say.
I'll just a question for people keen to get people's views on attention. This is obviously looking at attention across devices. be keen to get people's views on attention over time. You know, the common assumption is people's attention span is ever shrinking, and we're all turning into goldfish. And you know, I think there's probably a lot of evidence. Well, there is, you know, some evidence that, but you also hear evidence to the contrary, saying, you know, well, actually, there's a number of things to say. If you can, it's almost like making an excuse. If you make content that will hold people's attention, people, you know, and I think, you know, people quote the average length of a Hollywood film is now, I don't know, 20% longer than it was 15 years ago. And, you know, I think, you know, similarly with kind of music and podcasts and things, there's a lot of long form content that people are happy to listen to. So, yeah, I don't know, have people got a view on that? Are we turning into goldfish, or is that just an excuse for people creating poor content?
I'd side on the latter, but it's difficult to really get, you know, evidence or truth about what really is the case. Some of it is clearly designed to help sell other products and services and things. But, you know, I agree. I've seen some of the studies, and I've seen some of the counter kind of studies to say that our attention is always, it just may be a bit more fragmented. It doesn't mean it's shrunk in any way. Now,
Yeah.
that could argue, you know, that things are different. But you didn't have devices which may split your attention. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not aware that there's something going on, but you may not be as immersed in that particular ad or experience. But equally, you could probably find you can double down on it. You can end up with more, even higher levels or depths of attention if there's a combination of channels which are being used for a particular,
Yeah.
you know, not just right there and then, but in a short time frame.
Yeah.
There's an interesting conversation that I had with, I don't know if you're aware of the agency Mesh, who do kind of experience tracking, but they do very similar to this, but time series, time diaries, look at people's exposures to all kind of stimulus over a week-long period, and they kind of evidence the emotional side behind attentiveness as well. That if you are, and the case study they were talking about was work with Bounty, whereas if you're in the cinema and you see a nice Bounty ad which kind of taps into tropicality and holidays and the taste associated with that, actually then when you get to the point of being at the point of sale and at the till and you see a Bounty bar there, all of that kind of attentive emotional recall comes back to that point. So there is a huge it suggests there's a huge kind of connection across multiple channels to be able to then, you know, recall that attentiveness that you have, whether that's emotional, whether that's rational. But I thought that was kind of sort of quite interesting from a multi kind of sort of touch point viewpoint. Cool. So that was the end of the kind of the researchy bit, Ian. So I don't know whether it's kind of worthwhile recapping quickly, or we can pick up another time on that if necessary.
I'm interested in people's opinions on the new metric. I mean, is this just white paper marketing publicity, or is this something that could be taken seriously? Because we have endless, you know, metrics that we're looking to measure, and now they're suggesting something else, which is in addition. I mean, is this something that we should look at seriously, or is this just a marketing paper fad?
I think for advertisers that don't have MMM, it's more valuable. But I think if you have MMM, I don't see the value of this as much. It's just.
Nick, can you go back to the slide which talks about the new metric, or the proposed measurement?
As in the definition of it, this waterfall funnel.
What is it? What was it called again?
So the attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions.
There we go. Yeah.
Which is basically calculated within a funnel type process of identifying whether the ad is there to be viewed, whether it's actually being viewed, which is where the funnel comes in, and then the dwell time, so how long people are being attentive to that ad, which gives you then this uniform measure of attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions.
I mean, the reason I'm interested in this metric is because the whole paper revolves around it. So I'm curious to see, you know, those on the client brand side, if this is something that, you know, could be taken seriously or not.
I'm trying to get a sense of where it actually fits in terms of, is it going to help me prove any outcomes?
Yeah.
Justification? Is it going to help me plan better? Or if we're trying to get into one of these broadcast medias, which may be, the classic, trying to invest further up, the funnel continually, how does that, the kind of, how does that help me plan differently, apart from maybe just helping me peg out an area where I can have investment? But it doesn't give me, nothing's ever concrete, but I'd be concerned it may be more vanity and maybe something which is a color metric than necessarily that's something which really helps you set your stall out, what you're going to do different, how you're going to do it. That's just an immediate thought.
I don't know what you think, Nick. I mean, obviously it needs a lot more, a lot more work in analyzing this.
I think without knowing what the research program is and how this is being taken forward, knowing that this is just a few kind of high-level channels, what data sits underneath it, it feels like it is very much more of a kind of sort of look back and validate what has been done, and how attentive that has been, rather than something which you can sit down and help, with agencies plan out. Okay, well, how do you plan across this attentive measure across all channels? It doesn't feel it's there yet, but I think it'll come across the same challenges that most kind of research does, is around trying to get this uniform measure across all media exposures and understanding the impact of that. And that's very hard to do in a way that, if I'm walking down the street and I'm trying to kind of understand whether I've seen a ad in a shop window versus a nice big poster, or something on a bus that's driving past, how do you catch all of those multiple exposures and be able to bring that back to a single exposure and a single ad to know how attentive you were to that and the impacts of that on sales? It's incredibly hard to get right, and I think that's probably why this first part is what it is, in the sense that it doesn't cover everything, but it's probably trying to understand, well, how much interest is there in this? Does attention as a concept take you further to understand how you better plan versus everything you have at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, I appreciate I did miss all the but in and of itself, it's relatively dry. And as with everything, here you're kind of comparing attention against one medium against another, and that in itself isn't the right way to plan, because the variabilities of quality of creative, the message, the power of the brand, and all the rest of it all kind of throw into it. And that's kind of missing here, and you end up with that kind of it almost becomes a bit of an efficiency metric, which could be one of those secondary things you can go to into your box of tricks to kind of use to help justify a business case if it's getting a bit sticky or tricky, and it helps you just get it over the line. But again, I'm not. I think there's always a lively debate about attention, etc. But things that stand out will get some form of attention. So how do you then measure the efficacy of quality, of the quality of the execution in this? Because the rest of it is purely, it has been viewed, it has dwell time. It's clearly a dimension to be looked at, rather than just the fact that this particular medium on average is more attentive than another.
Nick, in the paper, can you remind me? Do they focus on creativity?
No, it's
because isn't that? I mean, the back. I mean, ultimately, the battle for attention. If you're looking at your laptop, sitting in the cinema, on TV, whatever. I mean, basic principles say that it's the power of the creative that will keep people's attention, or if it's not good, then it will lose people's attention. I mean,
and that isn't what is referenced here. It's something which is not hidden towards the end of the document, but it says that all of this is important. It's the channel you choose, it's the creative, it's the idea, and it's the target you select, and that gives you your attention gains. But from that target selection and creative use, for the point of this research, they just assume average levels of creativity and average levels of audience selected. So it's not too costly, it's not too niche, it's not too broad, it's just kind of average. So it is looking at just the one arm of what can drive attention. And I think, you know, that's something which has always been a big tension within, whether it's kind of working in agencies and seeing ideas pitted from media agencies, battered back by creative agencies, or whether it's big brand idea marketers versus more commercially minded marketers. It needs something to bring that all in together, so you know which lever you are pulling to drive attention. And I think this doesn't do that. Because it is based on averages of averages, which can then be quite misleading. Just my view.
I think Nick made a good point earlier about people's attention spans becoming like goldfish. I mean, you know, that's a modern challenge for marketers, isn't it?
Yeah, but again, you know, I honestly, you know, I put the counter as well that our attention spans, are we becoming like goldfish? Because, you know, I still believe, you know, a lot of people use that as an excuse for poor creative. I think if you communicated well to the right audience, through the mic, it will cut through.
Yeah.
And you don't actually have to put too much money behind an idea, and ideas travel. You know, that's kind of paid advertising, experiential, whatever. It's yeah, yeah. You know, we've seen a number of examples of that. You know, in our business, you know, a lot of what we do is experiential activity. You know, right. It doesn't always work, but at best, you know, we've put on sort of brand experiences for one of our brands, Aperol, and you know, there's only sort of 4,000 people experienced it. But you know, it's picked up on a sort of Kantar brand health tracker that on average for every person that attended, 1,000 people were aware of that event. And you know, so you think if you use the content, it makes the noise, things do travel. So it caught people's attention.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's
like
interesting.
That.
The experiential is interesting because, you know, the last year we just talking about experiential, but I mean, experiential in terms of attention is critical. And are you, as the Campari brand, are you investing back into experiential? I mean, as you mentioned, you're doing some events. Are you going to accelerate your investment in experiential to capture people's attention?
I mean, pre-COVID, it was one of the biggest things, you know, we did invest in, whether it's, you know, in urban environments, at festivals. We've had to kind of obviously adapt and switch that investment into other things. But as soon as we can, yeah, we will be switching, you know, a good chunk of our investment back towards experiential. You know, what we do is it's quite simple. You know, people you know, on the whole enjoy it. We know that, you know, people try an Aperol spritz. Not everyone likes it, but 70% of people do, and they'll come back and drink it quite regularly. So, you know, it's quite a simple challenge. Just give people more than just, you know, a drink, but more of an experience, and we'll recruit a few more people.
It just reminded me, I think, as I was flicking through one of my social feeds this week or last day or two, I think there was a article in Marketing Week from one of your competitors. I think it was Diageo. There was an article about experiential marketing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I saw the headline, didn't actually read it, to be honest, but it was about experiential coming back. So I don't know if you've seen it. I mean, I'll send you the link if you haven't seen it, but it's probably, you know, the heart. I mean, in terms of the battle for attention, you know, what we've missed over the last year is, you know, we're talking about limited channels in this report, you know, TV, and okay, everyone's been sitting at home watching on TV, but the battle for attention, you know, real life experiences is, I mean, people are clamoring for that, and this paper doesn't touch on that at all. I think this paper is just going to annoy Nick because it doesn't touch on cinema, doesn't touch on experiential, but all these are, you know, going beyond the obvious TV to really how to get people's attention. So I think Yeah, I mean, Nick, it's interesting feedback to
We
Ebiquity.
do use some of it. We do use some of these channels. You know,
Well, I mean, I understand that, but in terms of, you know, there's critical channels here, you know, which grasp people's attention that have been ignored in this paper, which is, you know, obviously an oversight.
But I think that my experience of all these sort of studies, that's it. They're very often from the point of view of who's kind of creating that, and you know,
yeah,
different. But often, you know, like, you know, the newspaper industry will try and sell its wares, and so they compare it with who they're thinking they're competing against. And it might be with, you know, desktop or whatever, but they're not thinking about how consumers consume their media and get the whole gamut. And you know, the typical thing, you know, when YouTube, they come out with these sort of effectiveness reports, you know, they just compare themselves with Instagram, and you know, and that's kind of far as it goes, without thinking, okay, you know, where else can I put my money, in TV or oh, hello. So yeah, I don't know, the limitation of all of these reports, they just seem from the perspective of who's providing them and their sort of blinkers of who their competitors are, without thinking consumers and where they might spend their entire attention.
So, which I guess kind of leads on to where we wanted to try and get the conversation, is kind of, if all of this research is quite self-validating by the people who are providing it, where are the honest gaps that need filling, if there are any, around understanding measurement? Or, you know, do we have everything covered? Have we got enough which is working well, which offsets where the gaps are? Yeah, kind of open debate.
I think from an O2's perspective, obviously, in terms of measurement, we've got so much data available to us and so little human resource to be able to deal with that data that we're perhaps not using it as effectively as we could be. And there are certain ways of, I guess, the organisation doing things in silos that mean that we can't effectively measure some things that we need to be able to measure, because there's less of that joined up conversation that means that we're set up in the way to be able to do that. So I think for us at the moment, it's really kind of having that resource to make sure that we're at the front of the conversation, to be able to set ourselves up in a way to be able to measure. But also, you know, when we're at the point of measuring, we are using the data in the right way to measure the right things and be able to get the answers that we're looking for.
Is that kind of integrated versus siloed view of measurement, Laura, been harder because of the everyone not being in the office together anymore? I mean, I know O2's always had remote working anyway, so it's always been there or thereabouts in terms of, yeah, sorry, can't hear you, you're too far away from the spider phone, can you get a bit closer? Sorry, that's not my data to provide. But do you see that kind of changing? How's that kind of been affected in terms of creating that consistent view?
Well, I think in some ways, in terms of process, it's been harder to set up processes within the organisation to allow for the upfront measurement. And because there have been fewer of those sort of, I guess, organic conversations that you would have around the processes, you know, these things have been brought in that aren't necessarily fully embedded, and therefore we still have gaps and things aren't quite working as we'd like them to. Which I think would be much easier if everyone was in the same place and you're working towards and pulling towards the same goals.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, we're definitely lacking in terms of the face-to-face contact.
Cool. What about other gaps? Are there anything that you're seeing, Nick, in terms of getting or not getting a picture of what's working for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, good question. I think to me, I'm not thinking so much gaps. Yeah, there are gaps, but I'm just thinking from my own perspective. It's more about joining the dots of what we do have than necessarily try and create more dots, if you see what I mean. And
yeah.
You know, I just yeah, I mean, I understand it's not the easiest thing to do, but you know, I'll give you one example. You know, our friends at Kantar provide us with lots of sort of different data points. They manage our brand health tracker, couple of dips a year. Obviously, we get TGI data from them, and they evaluate our PR activity. And there's kind of 3 data points, and at no point does that, whenever you get sort of reports from these people, do they sort of reference each other? And off on a TGI, might be, oh, fantastic, we've got another sort of like 500,000 drinkers, but then you look at your brand health tracker provided by the same people, and the number of drinkers has gone down by 5% in that quarter. And you think, why are you leaving me with a problem of trying to sort of join that what's going on together? And similarly, if things are kind of going well, no one's kind of thinking, why might this be? Oh, let's talk to our people that do your PR evaluation, who is the same people, and maybe awareness shot up in June because of that PR campaign or something. So that's just an example within one business. And you talk to them and think, why aren't you joined up? Well, it's a different profit center with different offices and blah blah blah. So if they're struggling just within one business to kind of join the dots, then how hard it is when you really kind of try and join up other things, what you're doing on TV or experiential activity, etc. So to me, it's not looking for gaps. It's about joining the dots of the various data points and trying to make some sense between them and linking back with what might have caused those things to change.
Yeah.
So that's my kind of, what we're trying to work on. How much success?
I think that's a challenge that many organisations face. I know time in Samson, time in O2, that telling that story in a consistent way where everything links up is possibly the hardest thing to do. And as an agency on the outside, it depends on manpower. It depends on how close you are to the business and how your organisation kind of lets you know what is happening, which can make it quite difficult or quite or easier to kind of tell that story. Yeah. And I know obviously with Kantar, that's why they came all in under the Kantar brand and brought all the different elements together, whether it's Millward Brown, whether it's the experience side, whether it's the ad tracking, etc. Yeah. But I think it's challenging people's skill sets to be a lot more T-shaped rather than specialist. And I think we've gone down the route as marketers of creating lots of specialists. And I think for me, that's kind of one of the gaps that we're seeing is how do you create enough knowledge and awareness across all of your teams so you can have better conversations around how things will line up is potentially the biggest gap.
One way we've been looking at that at O2 and data insight and analytics anyway is we've got collaborative working groups where we have people from different areas within data insight and analytics come together around certain topics, and they'll deal with the stakeholder request as a sum total as opposed to working in silos, which has worked really well in some cases, but really depends on sort of stakeholder involvement and the person leading the collaborative working group, it would seem. So yeah, varying levels of success with those, but I think overall it has been a positive for the function.
So I think what we're kind of saying is we don't need so much new research to tell us here's the best new measure going forward. We need actually help from organisations to help bring it all in together and provide a bit of context rather than something new. So Andy, you can take that back to Ebiquity. I'll leave that with you.
Well, I made the effort to read the whole paper, so. I mean, I think it's very interesting, but I agree with Nick. Promotes self-interest obviously, and misses out some very important elements. Creativity is fundamental in attention, and missing out specific channels or tactics that really grasp attention. That's a massive gap. So. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that metric is interesting, but I do think it overcomplicates it, to be honest.
I think you might be right. I don't think we're being too harsh on it. I think it's, well, I mean, it was quite a hard paper to read in the first place, which was quite, given its attentive headline, it
I know the irony.
Make it easy to understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I won't provide any more comments because I'll just be
be in trouble.
Yeah, be in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Thank you for that. I think we won't kind of drag out the conversation any longer. Really, we were going to sort of keep going till 7:30, but I think it's evening. It's sunny. So I will kind of thank you for the conversation that we have had so far on that, and obviously, you know, anything else that comes from that, we're more than happy to kind of pick up on people's behalf. I think I did mention at the beginning that a bit of a plea going forward, and I know that I've kind of sent a begging email to you at one point, saying it'd be great to kind of understand the journey that you had with The Economist. But we are kind of sort of changing how we kind of bring those stories to life a bit more. And we've got 4 people lined up to do one-to-one interviews in a more kind of sort of podcast style, kind of TED style, 18-minute, 20 minutes. Let's pick out something specific around effectiveness and really dive into what's driving that within organizations, which I think will change the nature of the conversation and make being a member of the Ignition Room a bit more valuable, hopefully. So we are still looking for people to join us on that. We are still looking for people to come and help co-host an Ignition Room. So the example of that would be Chris, me from Entain, who took us through his effectiveness journey for the last 5 years, which was thoroughly insightful and thoroughly detailed in terms of explaining how they've got to where they are and where they've got to, and where they're going, rather. And we're not always looking for that level of detail because that was, you know, very open. But I think it was a good story that he had to tell, and he told it very well from that. And if you are interested, we can share that. Chris has given us a set of slides which have taken out the CMO's scorecard, which he showed us before he showed the CMO, that was how open it was. And then middle of September, September the 15th, we are aiming to have a in real life Ignition Room in London, which would be quite nice, just bringing this conversation to life a bit more, maybe over a glass of wine and a few nibbles. And the last kind of sort of plea within this, and I'll send this out and it's got the link to it, is a new bit of work that's come out from the IPA around marketing effectiveness culture, which is going to be a really interesting report that comes out just before F-Works, their flagship conference, which looks at both effectiveness from a brand point of view and effectiveness from an agency point of view, and will hopefully start to identify the gaps of how agencies and brands can start to work better together around effectiveness as well. So that is it for us. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining. And yeah, we will share this, and thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.